Please give a very warm welcome to Helena Kennedy.
Peter, that was ridiculous. A member of the establishment? I'm the woman who's introduced as Helena Kennedy, the lawyer who represents women and other criminals. Hay for me is very much, as others have said, a very special place, and like others, it too is penciled into my diary every year because I feel that it is something that I have to do to renovate those parts of the soul and to have the opportunity as an autodidact to continue learning and listening from others, and it really is an incredible place. I too have been involved with you now, Peter, for something like 13, 14 years. And I started when I was writing about the erosion of civil liberties that took place really in the wake of 9/11, where we forgot that the rule of law actually matters when it's being tested, and that's when it is most important. And there was a retreat by governments, not just here, but in the United States and other places, from civil liberties. And I wrote a book about that and went down to Hay and argued the toss about why civil liberties mattered. And then in the following years, spoke on many different occasions and platforms. I did a report on why democracy wasn't working, and by God, are we seeing some of the arguments being played out now, saying, you know, what that people didn't feel listened to, and that people felt it was big money that was making decisions, and all those things that we've heard echoing here and in the United States about why people are feeling so disengaged and disenchanted. And I suppose really one would say it's a reflection of globalization and a particular economic methodology that makes people feel very abandoned. But what I feel about Hay is that as well as introducing us to great literature and to wonderful books and to people with ideas, it also has become a space, a public space in which we talk about the great issues of our days. And it's become that public domain space where we do feel that political discussions are so barren and our democracy is so hollowed out that here we have a place where we can actually talk about the big subjects of our times. I've had great experiences as well, and I love the fact that as well as providing that space at Hay, Peter, that you've also been so inventive in taking literature and taking it to other parts of the world and creating other places where Hay becomes planted. And so I've been to Cartagena. I've been when we did one in Lebanon, where we took it to Beirut. I've also been to Segovia and seen the wonderful things that come out of your broadening our relationships around the world. I do think that there's something incredible about the business of having those discussions about great books. I've had the opportunity of doing it with people who are crime writers. I suppose the criminal lawyer with the crime writer is a good combination. Although sometimes things take you by surprise. I do remember having a discussion with a crime writer at Hay where we talked about, you know, did you plan the book in advance? Do you work out this, you know, who's done it, and do you have a sort of map on the wall about how you deal with the evidence and so on? And then people in the audience ask questions and they say, the people in your book surprise you? And then the crime writer answers and so on. And you have to beat back all the questions. And then somebody put their hand up and I said, I'll have one last question. What is it? And she said, where did you buy your shoes? So, you know, we go from the sublime to the ridiculous. But the story that I wanted to tell you was one which was about Segovia, where we have a wonderful director of Hay in Segovia, and she had invited not me but my husband, who's a surgeon and who does facial reconstruction, and where he does incredible work on the face, dealing with trauma or cancer or childhood deformity and so on. And of course, it was the time when there was a big discussion going on about the ethics of facial transplants. And although he is not, he's not done a facial transplant, we haven't ever done one here in Britain, he's often made programs about the challenges of that and the ethical challenges of it. So he was invited to go to Segovia and to speak about his specialism and about his work. And he is a very good public speaker. And so he was doing this, and I hadn't heard him for ages. And so I was sitting in the audience, as was Peter, and he was doing his stuff and talking about his thing, and he had terrible slides which would make your stomach turn about the horrible surgery that he does and so on. And then there were the questions from the audience. And Peter started it by asking a question where he said, are there sometimes ethical issues that you have to engage with? Supposing somebody like Michael Jackson doesn't want to look black and wants surgeons to help him to look different. Isn't there something ethically challenging about that? And Ian responded by saying, well, actually, it's very rarely like that somebody comes in and says, make me look completely different. What people do is that with someone like Michael Jackson is that they start by saying, I feel that my nose is too broad for when I'm being photographed and so on, and I'd like you to narrow it. And then they come the next time and they go to another doctor and say, would you make my lips slightly smaller? And then they go to somebody about lightening their skin. And so it's never in the way that one would imagine with that simple question. But it got me thinking, and so I then put my hand up and I said, what about the challenges of, for example, someone who might have a Down syndrome child? And parents coming with their child and saying, we'd like you to operate on our child so that they don't look Down syndrome. And then Ian responded by saying that actually, you've got to be very careful as a surgeon, that your patient is the child, and that you've got to make sure that you're not doing things that the parents want, which might not be in the interest of the child. And actually a Down syndrome child, by looking different, signals to the world their difference, which in many ways means that people are protective and often forgiving, perhaps, if there's behaviors that they find challenging or whatever. And so that he would have problems about wanting to do that. And then... And so I then came in again and I said, but there's been also some debate recently about the possibility of operating in utero in trying to deal with things like cleft lip and palate, because of, to deal with it before the child is actually born. Are there ethical challenges in that? And he then looked at me and he said to me, look, you and I are going to sleep together tonight. Why can't we have that discussion then? And then, of course, half the audience were listening through earphones, and they sort of suddenly heard the translation saying, we are going to sleep together tonight, And so they all turn around and look at me and think, is this terrible man picking up a woman in the audience? and then a woman put her hand up and she said, I'm not going to sleep with you tonight, but I want to ask you a question too. Anyway, the whole thing was an uproar. And we ended up being hysterical about the fact, and then he announced that actually I was his wife. But we've had the most fantastic time coming to Hay, spending time in Hay. And all I can tell you is if you get the chance of sleeping with the person who's doing the lecture, take it. Bye.